Oracle's view of the world is always up to date. The world of finance is no exception. Everything from interest rates to exchange rates at the push of a button. There's interest for the kids too, jokes, letters, and the latest pop news. While winning a prize only costs a phone call on the dial-in quiz. And when you hard-working women have earned a rest, there's Home File, complete with lists of special prices from the major supermarkets. Whenever you want full value from your TV, page your Oracle.
Hello, I'm Carl Attrell, and you're listening to Teletext People. Teletext People is a social record of people that have been involved in either the production or the restoration or the artwork of the blocky medium that once dominated our TV screens in Great Britain before 2012. In the series, you will hear from the pioneers, the people who made it tick, and also people who have only recently visited the teletext medium but are in their own way keeping it alive for the preservation for others in the future. Gareth Herincx is a journalist who has worked across the media in newspapers, magazines, TV, teletext, radio and online, and is now a specialist motoring journalist for Hello magazine. And he was kind enough to give me some time, and I opened up by asking him what his first recollection of teletext was.
The first time I came across teletext as a medium was probably as a football fan. I support Ipswich Town. They were the halcyon days under Bobby Robson in the sort of 70s and 80s. So it's always a good time to look at the football results and to read the match reports. So I guess it was probably CFAX, and it was probably looking to see how Ipswich had got on. I was also a big Formula One fan. So again, I wanted to see how, the likes of Nigel Mansell got on. And the great thing about teletext as a medium is that tables work really well. So football tables or qualifying times for motor racing. So I guess that was probably the first time I came across it. I hate to say, probably not Oracle until later, mainly because I was a sort of snotty children's BBC person. I was a Blue Peter person, I wasn't a Magpie person. So I guess I was more inclined to look at CFAX. So that's probably the first time.
Yeah, the Formula One, that used to borrow some CFAX graphics for its visuals. Did it?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've seen some clips online where they use it. It's quite a, I think in the late 70s and early 80s they used a fair bit of that, and a lot of my family are Town fans as well. So yeah, I feel your pain.
Well, it's certainly pain now, but it wasn't pain when they won the FA Cup and the UEFA Cup and were flying high in the old First Division. But it went downhill, unfortunately, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Well, yeah, it was always. My family always said that when they used to go to the UEFA Cup and watch was it Barcelona and all that play at Portman Road. I think if it was them, they would always thought it was the norm that those days would never go away. Yeah,
I wish. But I don't even look to see how they get on these days, unfortunately. But hopefully they will be back one day.
Yeah, there's always one day. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, Oracle and CFAX were obviously very important for getting the news and information. So how did that sort of how did you wind up working at a teletext service? From the humble beginnings of just using it on the TV yourself.
Well, it was a bit of an accident, if I'm honest with you, because what I really wanted to do, I mean, I went to journalism college at Harlow. You probably know Harlow reasonably well. Thankfully, I was only there for a year. And then I did my 3-year apprenticeship on a local newspaper in Oxfordshire. But journalism was my way into, or at least I thought it was going to be my way into TV. I wanted to be a Blue Peter presenter. That was my ultimate goal. It never happened. I didn't even get anywhere near it. But I kind of drifted. So I worked after my local newspaper. I was an assistant editor, I think, on a national children's newspaper called Scoop. That lasted about a year or so, and it got into trouble. So I was then looking for other work. I became, I think, the first editor of Zero magazine, which was a video games magazine. That was very short-lived because I realised quite soon that I wasn't massively into video games. So then I started looking again for something, and I saw this role advertised, and it was advertised as a researcher. And I think it's because Oracle Teletext was an ITV company. It was, like Anglia or Southern or whatever. It was a franchisee. And and I think when they advertised it as a sort of grade rather than exactly what the job was. It turned out that the job was really covering for various section editors at Oracle Teletext, including Buzz, the teenagers magazine, but also the kids magazine, and probably the TV magazine as well. So I went in there as someone who covered various editors, which was great experience. And then fairly soon the editor of Buzz moved on, and I got that job. And a relaunch followed soon after, and the rest is history.
Yeah, Buzz was certainly my favourite work of graphics on the Oracle service. It was really nice to see that red page with the yellow Buzz on there, and it was certainly a very attractive page, and it was a page that other people who went to cut their career in teletext enjoyed as well, because I believe that there's Paul Rose, who was Mr. Biffo, went on to start Digitizer in the service that soon came after the one you were working at. He was inspired by Buzz. He was quite an avid user of it, as were many people. What sort of features did the Buzz magazine have?
Well, when I joined, it was it had some odd things in it, or at least I thought they were slightly odd and not massively interesting, to be honest with you. Things like I think there was one thing called In Orbit or whatever, which was kind of space news. So there were things like that which were sort of slightly odd and quite worthy. So when the opportunity came to relaunch it, I tried to inject some interactivity into it. Obviously, you're fairly limited in the type of interactivity you can have on a teletext magazine, but we had comments from daily comments from our users, our readers. They would either phone in to our answer machine. We had a specific answer machine. It sounds very old worldy, but they used to leave messages on the answer machine. We'd pick those up and put the good ones on screen. Obviously, they could write in as well. These were the days before email. So those were really the only two ways that you could interact. So the daily comments, I think we called it Write On, was probably one of the best ways of interacting and getting people involved in what we were doing and having their say. It also enabled me to develop some sort of relationship with them. There would be awful ed comments after a lot of the what they wrote in, and also I could dare I say it, write or make up the odd comment myself, just to not just to fill space, but also just to move the conversation in, or to get them going in some way. Maybe it was about the news, or a film, or music, or something. So yeah, I mean, I think the interactivity was something that was really useful.
Oh, so you'd enter your own comments in there just as a bit of kite flying, just to see what would engage your audience. Yeah,
no, absolutely, and I think it wasn't too obvious. I mean, they were obviously they were made up names, but I mean the comments were fairly innocuous. They weren't too bad, but they might trigger something, and it might help for the following day when we needed more comments in from people. So yeah, that was really useful. But I mean the bits of the relaunch that probably people remember most, sort of the video games, adding the computer games section, which was sort of, I think it was sort of reviews and news, the odd interview as well, but also obviously the diaries as well, mainly Debbie's diary, but later joined by Josh's diary. It became a pretty good magazine, and I'm quite looking back at it, I'm quite proud of what was achieved there.
Absolutely, and coming back and looking at researching the topic, so I wish I paid more attention when I was younger, because I'm looking at the older services now that are archived on Jason Robertson's site, where he archives a lot of pages that are captured, and there's a lot of interesting features on there.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I think you forget, or it's easy to forget, just how how important Oracle, but also obviously CFAX as well was, because it was so accessible. I mean, I think Oracle could reach something like half the population, via teletext TV sets. It was absolutely huge, and I think we always used to boast that we were read by more than an awful lot of big newspapers, like the Telegraph and the Times, and the Daily Mail even, and the Daily Express at the time. We're not quite sure whether, well, at least I do know where those figures came. They weren't sort of particularly scientific. They were done via surveys, a bit like the Barb figures you get now for TV. So they're not real figures, but they were based on huge, great surveys of people. So it really was important. And when you were young, there were it was the internet of its day. There weren't any other ways really to get that kind of information and education. Just at your fingertips in your living room.
And the interaction that you've mentioned, that culminated in some quizzes that you did as well, which you used the reveal button quite often on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a fantastic thing to be able to do that. And my colleague who used to do kids, Sarah Kavanovich, used to have jokes. That was a big part of her output every day, and jokes work incredibly well because you can ask the joke and then press reveal for the punchline, but they also work incredibly well for quizzes, and particularly end of year quizzes and things like that. I think work incredibly well. Obviously, when Teletext Limited took over, they moved it into in another direction, and with the Bamboozle page, which was absolutely fantastic, and a superb graphic to go with it, and that became became a cult in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It was sort of like an innovation that's stood on the shoulders of what you'd already laid down with the Buzz magazine. You mentioned Debbie's diary. I'd be very interested to know, how did you come up with the idea of Debbie's diary? Did you just wake up one day and go, this is because we would regard this as a blog now, wouldn't we?
Yeah, probably. Well, Oracle Teletext already had a daily soap called Park Avenue, which was created, I think, by Robbie Burns. That is his real name, who was, I think, our deputy editor or features editor at the time. But it was written by my colleague over in the TV department, Steve Regan, for most of its life. So there already was a bit of a history of having some sort of, let's just say, fiction on Oracle. I guess the interaction. Adrian Mole was probably fairly big at the time, so I suppose a lot of the inspiration came from that. But also, I think there was actually a good reason for doing it, and that was we wanted to encourage more girls to read Oracle as well. And so, a diary based on a teenage girl seemed like a good idea. The reality, of course, was that it was really hard work for me because I'm having to put myself in the mind of a teenage girl. So it has its limits. It had its limits, but luckily I had a little bit of assistance occasionally from some of my colleagues, some of my female colleagues, Sarah in Kids, or a freelancer we had called Max Benato. Both of them used to help out with certain things, and I think Max used to write it occasionally when I was away or something like that. So really useful to have their input. And it's really one of the reasons why, that difficulty for me, it became quite difficult after a year or two, is why we introduced Josh's diary. And Josh was Debbie's younger brother, irritating younger brother. But that allowed me to perhaps draw on slightly more autobiographical stuff from my teenage years. And also, being a snotty little boy, they do different things to girls. So, it's a lot easier to write in that respect. But we didn't want to lose Debbie altogether, so we alternated them, I think, a week at a time. And it was quite interesting as well because it allowed you to give a different angle on both of them. So, maybe Josh would comment on his sister Debbie and things that she'd been up to and her boyfriends or whatever, and Debbie would give you an insight into what Josh was like as well. So I think it worked. Slightly complicated, but it worked.
Yeah. So with Debbie's diary and Josh's diary, did you get any engagement back from the readers who sort of like could have took these characters at face value and made a connection with them?
Well, I'm sure we did. Off the top of my head, I can't really remember any specific instances of people writing in and saying how wonderful it was, or for that matter, thinking that it was real in any way. But I'd imagine a few people probably did. The famous occasion, which I'm sure you're going to come to, is literally the one complaint that led to a slight bit of controversy. So that was kind of a bit of feedback that we didn't really like, and it had ramifications as well.
Mm. Can you tell us more about this complaint?
Well, yes, I can. And I have in my garage, I have an archive, a Debbie's Diary archive, which is actually a small suitcase stuffed full of printouts from Debbie's Diary. Not all of them, unfortunately, but a good deal of them, because I did toy with the idea at one stage of actually putting them into a book form, but never got round to it. But I actually, in that suitcase, I found the letter that was sent to to the Broadcasting Standards Council, which were the sort of Ofcom of their day. And the letter of complaints, I'll read you a little excerpt from it in a second, which led to, unfortunately, us getting a reprimand from the Broadcasting Standards Council. We didn't have to take Debbie's diary off air, but we had to put it on after the watershed, which was a real shame. So it went on at 9 o'clock at night instead of whenever it used to go on before, and we could carry a sort of an innocuous sort of mild summary of what had gone on the day before. So even if you were too young to have read it, you'd at least know what had gone on, the day before or whatever, in a sort of small form. So this letter, I won't tell you who it's from because it's actually a photocopy of, and he may still be alive and I might get into trouble. But it starts like this. I think it kind of, in some ways, says it all. And it says, Dear Sir, do you honestly believe that you are doing our young people a service by allowing all that filth and immortality to be disseminated over your Buzz programme? ? Do you not have any qualms whatsoever? ? Some of us are doing our best in the schools to train up youngsters in the way of clean living and clean thinking, to say nothing of work done by the Scout and Guide associations, only to have their minds corrupted by this gutter filth and language which even upsets some of those to whom it is directed. So it's quite strong stuff. And clearly the Broadcasting Standards Council thought that Buzz, or at least the Debbie's Diary elements of Buzz, was slightly strong, or at least one of the days was. And we got a reprimand, nothing much, but the complaint was upheld, and as I say, we had to put it on on after the watershed. Interestingly, I also found a letter from one of the people who thought that Debbie's Diary should have stayed in its original time slot, and this kind of gives you an idea. It's quite interesting from a sort of cultural point of view, I think, because it gives you an idea of, how Debbie's Diary divided people. This is from a lady near St Albans who has got 3 teenage daughters. She's been a teacher of teenagers, and she was at the time a magistrate. And she's saying, "I'm writing to request that you return Debbie's Diary to its previous time slot, as I disagree most strongly with those people who think it's unsuitable for children to read." She goes on to say, "I really do not feel that there's anything on Debbie's Diary that could possibly do any harm. It is necessary to read the diary. There is nothing visual which could disturb, and what they don't understand will go over their heads. I doubt there is anything that you don't hear about at school, and Debbie seems to be a normal 15-year-old girl." So that gives you a bit of an insight into the times.
Well, yeah, I mean, having listened to both letters, I would say that when the first letter came in from the upset gentleman, to put it mildly, I think they probably weren't even aware of Debbie's Diary until that letter came in. That was quite Mary Whitehouse-esque, wasn't it? Really, that's quite an eye-opener. So with this 9 p.m. watershed, how did that work then? Was the diary only available between certain hours?
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest with you, after all these years, I can't tell you when. So whether it went on till sort of 9 or midnight, or until the early hours, I really can't remember. But as I say, there was a kind of summary, so people didn't have to miss out. And many years later, I think it was in 2009, there was a kind of there was an article in The Guardian by a journalist called John Plunkett, and he wrote an article called The Joy of Teletext. And there's a lovely quote in there which I really like, because he mentions Debbie's diary in that, and he says, and quote, "The daily diary of a nobody which had me and my fellow students completely addicted. It was a bit like Belle de Jour, but without the sauce. What's not to like?" And I really like the, Belle de Jour without the sauce. Though obviously the complainant thought it had too much sauce in it. But that's praise indeed, as far as I'm concerned, that kind of quote. So good times and great fun, but not without its stress, not just because, I was having to put my mind or myself into the shoes of a teenager again, even though I was in my, early 20s. It's a bit of a struggle to come up with these storylines every day. So quite often, and they were literally written every day, and sometimes right up until, when they're meant to be, when they were meant to go on air. So sometimes I'd be so desperate I'd kind of watch Neighbours at lunchtime, and I'd use that as a peg for what Debbie was going to say later on in the day. Sometimes it would be, talking about a film that was out at the time, or a single, another TV program, and if in doubt, she could always have a relationship problem, and a new boy would come across or something, like that. So it can, it worked, but it wasn't without its stress.
Was there any time was Debbie approached for any product placement at all?
God, I wish. That would be nice. No. But there was talk, as I say, of a book, and I'm sure we were approached by a company at some stage, but nothing came of it, which is a shame, because I've, for ahead of today, I've been looking through some of them, and there was some. I can't say I'm proud of it all. Some of those days writing were dire, but there's some quite interesting sort of cultural stuff in there. I mean, for instance, there's a day I read where her dad was a big Labour Party supporter, and he was desperate, in the 1992 election for Neil Kinnock to win. So there's an episode of Debbie's diary where she stays up with her dad into the early hours watching election results come in, and obviously it's huge disappointment, because despite what they thought and what the polls were saying, it turned out to be a loss for Neil Kinnock, and John Major got in. So little things like that, and there are lots of mentions of pop bands that I'd completely forgotten about, and heartthrobs at the time that are no longer heartthrobs, and a lot of stuff like that, and types of food that you used to eat and you don't really eat now. So fun times.
Oh, that's brilliant. I think there's certainly a lot of mileage for Debbie's diary. I know we sort of fast forward a bit, but did she received a bit of a reprise not too long ago, I think, on Jason's website?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you Google Debbie's diary and click on the teletext archaeologist site, you'll read those. Our mutual friend Rusty Russ on Twitter mentioned it to me. We had a bit of an exchange during the first lockdown. I think it probably was about Debbie's diary. He'd probably posted a picture of a typical day for Debbie or Josh, and it got us talking. And I had a bit of time on my hands during the first lockdown, like a lot of us. I quite fancied the idea of doing a little bit of fiction again. And I kind of thought there's a bit of unfinished business with Debbie's diary as well. We had to, when Oracle lost the franchise, we had a kind of I don't know how many months, probably 6 months or so, to sort of wind down the service in a way. So we needed to think of a way of finishing Debbie's diary, and rather than just letting it sort of die down, and not have anything happening, we decided fairly late in the day that Debbie, the Slater family, should emigrate to Australia and have a new start. It was probably the quickest emigration ever, because I don't think we announced it until, literally a few weeks before it actually happened. So they really got their skates on, all the packages at the embassy. But so it all ended that way for Debbie. But going back to lockdown, I suggested to Rusty Russ that I'll do a week. I'll revisit Debbie. So in 2020, I did a week, and the pages were brilliantly, as you'll see if you look at them, were great copies of what they would have looked like at the time on Oracle, and it was fascinating for me as well, just to try and think of a way of updating the story, because obviously Debbie's in her 40s now. She's married. She's got her own kids, and there was a lot of stuff to fill in the intervening 30 years. So it was a fascinating exercise, and it was also good to write it, because I wrote it in rather like teletext pages. So I sent it in chunks of, I think, three paragraphs basically, because as you know, teletext pages are about 70 words. So I had to think in those terms of, what can I get on each page? And I have to say, even after 30 years, I just about got it right. There are only a few pages where, it needed to be cut down by a word or two to fit. So, I was quite pleased. And obviously Debbie's life, has moved on massively. But it was quite a cathartic exercise. And, I was quite pleased with the result.
Yeah, when I read the diaries, first of all, it did strike me that it was teletext is such an effective medium that we're still familiar with, by using Twitter. It's very similar word spacing, and also Debbie's quite a touchstone, because some of the things that she was mentioning were things that often cross my mind as well. So. It was very, very interesting, and I'm very pleased that Russell could facilitate you reproducing some of that work. So it was really nice to read.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
That's no problem at all. And so with Debbie's diary and everything on the Buzz service, what was a typical day like at Buzz? Were you overseeing just the magazine at 560, or did you ever reach into the kids and the beatbox magazines as well?
I did once or twice cover John Homer, who was the editor of Beatbox. I know very little about music, so it was a hell of a struggle for me to do what he was doing, which was just to basically, as well as doing all his news and his comments, but just listening to new albums and knocking off reviews like he used to do was quite special. And I found it a bit of a struggle, but I did manage it once or twice when he was away. And occasionally I think I might have covered Sarah in Kids as well, and that was really good fun. Because a lot of her content was interactive, as I've mentioned before, like the jokes. But she also had a competition as well, which actually involved phoning. I can't really remember, but I think we actually phoned people up and asked them questions and things like that. So it was good fun, real interactivity, but obviously completely lost on a teletext page. It all happened off the page, but good fun. As for what I used to do on Buzz on a daily basis. Gosh, it used to be incredibly busy. And as I say, I used to leave Debbie's diary until the end, stupidly. So obviously that was quite often rushed. But I mean, the things like the comments coming in. There was we used to have a weekly competition as well, so there was a bit of organisation to be done in terms of getting the prizes for that. And gosh, what else was there? I mean, obviously there were quizzes as well, as you've already mentioned. So yeah, I mean, there used to be an awful lot there, and it used to keep me very busy.
So working at Oracle then sounded like great fun, but obviously we know that it did change to Teletext Limited around about 1992. What was the feeling on the ground when you knew that the franchise was up and it was going elsewhere?
Well, you can imagine it was devastating. Partly because we were like one big family, really. It wasn't like a sort of newsroom, highly competitive newsroom atmosphere or anything like that. It was, socially we would go out and, we were based in Soho. Our offices were above, or at least the editorial offices were above Boots at the end of Carnaby Street. So it was a great place to work. And there were loads of places to eat and drink around there. And we socialised a lot, and we had fantastic Christmas parties. And in fact, I met my wife, my future wife, at Oracle, and we're still together 30 years on. So that's the kind of place it was. But yeah, we were devastated when we lost the franchise. We couldn't understand how it was that Teletext, I think they were Teletext UK at the time, the consortium, how they bid so much, basically more than anybody else. So that's another story. But yeah, I mean, it was like a cloud hanging over us for the last, I can't remember when the announcement was made, but probably for the last 6 months or so.
Mm. And what did you look to do when Oracle came to an end? You're winding Buzz down.
Yeah.
Were you hoping to sort of like can continue a similar service on the new service?
No, not really. I mean, I used it as a way of going for my TV career. So I joined. I applied for a job as a researcher with an independent production company called Hewland International. They were already fairly well known. They made Games Master. I can't remember which channel it was on. But they were starting a new show, another computer games, video games show called, I think it was called Games World, which was going to be on Sky One. So I actually got that job in December, before the end of Oracle, and I was allowed to kind of keep a hand in at Oracle until the end. But my main job for those last few weeks was actually down in Docklands, working on Games World, and so I wasn't there really for the last few weeks, which must have been really difficult. I just popped in every now and again. So yeah, I was already moving on. I didn't last very long at Games World. I was there for about 3 or 4 months. Games World actually was the program that David Williams made his TV debut in. He was a character in there. I think he used to give hand out cheats and tips for players. But my job really was to get contestants, young people, school kids, to come down, obviously chaperoned with their parents, to come down to the studios and take part in these games on screen. And but it wasn't it wasn't a job for me, and I think probably after about 4 months or so, I left, and that was the point where I went, did a bit of travel, and then came back and started freelancing. So I did a bit of freelancing for Teletext Limited, as it was in Farm Lane, Fulham. Mainly working on again on the teenagers stuff and Bamboozle, I think. I didn't last very long there because I was a bit bolshy and I knew everything. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, like Oracle at all. It was all a bit too serious there for me. So I think ultimately we went our separate ways. But bizarrely, I also started freelancing as a sub-editor at the Press Association, who were then still based in Fleet Street. So I actually have the accolade of being one of the last people to work in Fleet Street. But weirdly, at the Press Association, I was editing the regional news pages for Teletext. At Oracle Teletext, ITN used to do our news and regional news, but at Teletext they got the Press Association to do it. So I was looking at, subbing raw copy from various correspondents from, the Outer Hebrides and God knows where, and translating those onto Teletext regional news pages. So I ended up kind of working for Teletext that way. But I also, I don't know how I fitted it all in. I also wrote a news round at the BBC because I thought, right, I might as well have another go. And I did do a few AP associate producer shifts there, but what they really wanted me for was the CFAX pages. Newsround had its own pages on CFAX, and with my experience, they thought I'd be ideal for that. So I kind of joined the roster of freelancers doing the Newsround pages for on CFAX.
That's quite ironic, really, that you've done a complete 360. You've managed to work at all the teletext services, then go to CFAX and only jump 10 pages because you're on Buzz 560, and I believe that the Newsround pages were started at 570.
Yeah, well done. Very good.
Very good.
No, you're absolutely right. And it was hugely challenging, I have to say, because as you know, Newsround was, I think it's still around, and is an award-winning show, and they have a particular way of telling the news and spreading the news. And on a teletext page where you've only got 70 odd words, just to get a news story across on a page is a challenge enough. But the Newsround way of doing it is to give some sort of background within the story as well. So you'd find yourself giving an update on, the latest in Bosnia, or the Middle East, but you'd also have to give a sort of you'd have to give some sort of background to the whole story as well. So it's hugely challenging. And obviously there were times as well, Newsround again had its way of dealing with stories that were really quite heavy for their audience. So, if there was a famous case of a child disappearing or something like that, they would always have a line they used which was along the lines of, these are incredibly rare events, and you'd have to try and sort of get that into the CFAX page as well. So, really, really challenging stuff.
And I guess the way the teletext services convey news anyway may have favoured Newsround as well, because you'd have to give things over rather concisely to the audience, but also be very factual as well. So that's where perhaps both services sort of like join together quite well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's a kind of a running joke amongst us old teletext journalists, ex-teletext journalists, which is that, when the likes of Twitter came along, short form, we found it incredibly easy because we're so used to, to cutting our copy down. And in fact, even now, I do a couple of shifts a week as a homepage editor for AOL or Yahoo. And a large part of my job is to monitor the news coming in from various feeds, but also to write headlines and intros, and they have to fit. So again, I'm drawing on all that experience from 30 odd years ago, and it's still serving me well.
Well, it's certainly excellent training. I mean, you mentioned Newsround earlier. There's a plethora of newsreaders that you see on ITN and on the ITV news networks that have started a Newsround, and that wouldn't be any different from the people who work behind the scenes on the teletext services as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I was at Newsround, I mean, I used to have to go to the daily editorial meetings to get some idea of the stories we were meant to be doing. And I think at the time, Krishnan was there, who's now at Channel 4 News. Julie Etchingham was there, and she's obviously one of the main anchors at ITN. So, before them, there were, the likes of Juliette Morris, who, were all fantastic journalists and able to convey news in such an effective way to young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And also Becky Jago as well, I think, if you're an Anglia news watcher. I think she was on it as well. Yeah.
No, I'm not Anglian, I'm afraid. I'm West Country down here, but in fact, I don't think it's even called West Country. It's ITV West. But I grew up in Bedfordshire, so I did used to watch Anglia then.
It's funny, really, where you can sort of like date people by their Blue Peter presenters and their Newsround newsreaders as well.
No, absolutely, and I'm of that age where I had the Blue Peter dream team of Leslie Judd, Peter Purvis, and John Noakes, with Val Singleton as special correspondent. That was an amazing lineup, and they were all my heroes, particularly John Noakes, obviously. But you can date people by their Doctor Who as well, though, can't you?
You certainly can. I'm a Peter Davidson type of person myself. So
you're a lot younger than me. I caught the tail end of John Pertwee, and he's probably still my number one. So they were good times. But unfortunately, if you watch those episodes now, the special effects are appalling. Another coincidence really was that when I was working at CFAX doing the Newsround pages, we had a new editor at CFAX, who was a guy called Pete Clifton, who oddly enough was my boss at the Press Association when I was doing the pages, the regional news pages for teletext. Anyway, he became the new editor at CFAX, and not long after he joined, he wanted to relaunch the service, and he wanted to have a features section again, because I think that had kind of died away, and it was really more of a sort of news service at the time. So I applied for the job and came up with loads of ideas. He gave me the job, and I got a team together, and I can't say it was a blank sheet of paper, because there were certain things that we had to carry on with, weird things like, God, off the top of my head, things like chess, and obviously cookery. There was a lot of cookery. What else was there? I think there was even fishing. It was bizarre, some really odd things. So we were committed to keeping those. But I was given a blank sheet to bring in new stuff as well, and we'll probably come to that in a while. But yeah, one of the things that we did was to build up relationships with children's BBC programmes. So yeah, I had meetings with the editor of Blue Peter and various other programs, because most of these programs had their own CFAX pages, and we made sure that so that if there was more information or some detail on how to make something or whatever on Blue Peter, then you'd be sent to a specific page on CFAX.
Yeah, I believe Tracy Island took a few hits over that time as well.
Probably, yeah. So, inadvertently, I kind of developed a relationship with the producers of various ITV shows. But, it was all very much behind the camera. Behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's good. So what sort of new features were you able to add on top of the up to the minute chess and fishing information that you had the remit to carry?
Yeah, well, again, I wanted to get some interactivity in there. So there were viewers' comments still at the time coming in via an answer machine, but also email had happened by then. So we used to get them on email and obviously letters as well. They were mostly to do with TV, I think. So they were kind of feedbacky things. I think we had we launched film reviews and music reviews as well. The lottery was new as well, so 555 was where you got your lottery results. And we also launched, I really wanted to have a TV reviewer, a fictional one. So it was... we could all of us in the team, because there was a full-time team of 4 or 5 of us, and then we had freelancers as well that we could draw on, and I wanted it to be someone generic, and we could therefore all write reviews. Obviously there was no continuity when it came to style. That went out the window because we all had different ways of doing things, but that was really good. I had the name because I wanted it to be called Jack on the Box. So it's just a question of having thinking up a name of a person. We wanted it to be a woman. We went through various names, and in the end we ended up with Caroline Jack. So Caroline Jack became Jack on the Box. And as I say, we all dipped in and wrote reviews for that. It ended up actually being one person in particular who used to do more than his fair share, and that was William Gallagher, who's at the time one of our freelancers, who's now a very well-established writer. We used to either watch the programmes live and knock out a review, and I think we used to send it in and someone used to type it up late in the evening. Or we'd get preview tapes, so they'd obviously all be on VHS, and weeks in advance we would, phone up someone at the BBC or even ITV companies and get them to send over a VHS for the new episode of Cracker or whatever the programme was, so that we could always have a review on. Really, it was great fun to be able to launch that, and it was popular, and you could tell it was popular by the sort of interactivity we got, particularly from comments. And it was fun working on it. It had its dull points, things like inputting chess and fishing, but we had some good stuff in there. Some of it was already done for us, like the TV listings, obviously. But we developed links with all the cookery shows, and they'd all be sent through to a certain page number as well. At the end of a cookery show, there'd be a plug to go to CFAX. So it all worked really well, and it was all thought through well.
But by about that time then, we're getting sort of like close to the emergence of the internet, as you've already mentioned. People are now sort of emailing into CFAX. Yeah. And I guess CFAX is beginning to change about that time too.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't think it did change massively. And I mean, I left... how long was I features editor? I was probably features editor for about 3 years, and I think I joined BBC News Online in about 1998. Weirdly, Peter Clifton, who I've already mentioned once or twice, went on to be the kind of number two at, and eventually to take over as the editor of BBC News Online. Anyway, when he moved over, he said, "Would I like to be the entertainment section editor at BBC News Online?" Obviously, I jumped at the chance. I'd kind of done what I wanted to do at CFAX, and BBC News Online was kind of pretty young at the time, sort of almost like a sort of fledgling service, but growing massively. And that was the exciting place to be. So I jumped at the chance, and it was really hard work because we did entertainment news, and there were various reviews and features there as well. I can't say most of my job was more managing a team and making sure we had the right content and going to meetings. Occasionally I was able to do a feature, and to this day I think if you search on Google with my name, I think I did interviews with people like Michael Crawford, Brian Blessed, and features about, I don't know, the remastered Fantasia. Those come up on Google now. They were actually done with an audio alongside them, but I think that's gone in the intervening years. But you can still see on the old pages, the old style pages, those reviews I did. But I didn't get to do an awful lot of them. But I had a great team again there, and that's something I've had throughout my time at CFAX and BBC News Online.
Yeah, and working on those services, you had to be pretty dynamic. I mean, were you in charge of the BBC section when Princess Diana died? You had to change your service over to accommodate the her departure.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of those people that got the call in the early hours to get into the office, and we literally just had to clear most of our content in the features department. Obviously, we could keep things, certain things that weren't, that were respectful, and we could have comments, people sending in their comments or whatever about how wonderful she was. But yeah, an awful lot of the slightly more flippant stuff had to go. So yeah, that was quite a morning, and it took days really before the service got back to some sort of normality. So yeah, quite a time, and bizarrely, I think about in November this year, I was half an hour into one of my shifts for Yahoo as one of my homepage editor shifts, and the news broke that the Queen had died. So immediately into that sort of mode of having to, change content and focus entirely on tributes and biographical stuff. So yeah, it was a touch of deja vu, but I guess that's what we're trained to do, and you do it. But yeah, there are a few occasions like that stick in the memory.
Yes, no, absolutely. So, what else are you up to these days? Then, with you said that you work for sort of like Yahoo and AOL, and you're a journalist as well.
Yeah, I mean, I only do a couple of shifts a week, usually antisocial hours and late night or weekends or whatever. But my main job really for the last 8 years or so has been as a motoring journalist. Cars are my big love, my big passion in life. And 8 or so years ago, I realised that I was offered a press launch for a new car by an ex-colleague of mine who was editing a magazine, and it just went from there. I realised after I'd written that feature that I can do this, and it took me a while to get up to speed.
If you excuse the pun.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got to be able to compare cars, so you have to drive as much as you can. But anyway, I did it, and I'd like to think I'm pretty good at my job now, and I've got some good outlets, including Hello Magazine, and my reviews go up on MSN, and I do other stuff that's kind of below the line, that you probably don't see, things for like Admiral Insurance and various other companies. So yeah, it's a great life. I get to, for the first time in my working life, I get to travel. I've always been desk bound, and now I get to go to launches, literally all over the world, drive amazing cars. It's kind of like a dream job for a lot of blokes, and I'm very lucky. I just wish I'd realised a lot earlier in my career that I could do a job like this and get paid for it.
Well, yes, all part of the journey, I guess. Yeah. So one day then we can bring either Debbie or Josh back, maybe driving one of the cars, maybe. Who knows?
They're both. Well, I suppose they're both into their 40s now, so maybe they've got to actually drive some of those cars themselves.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Gareth. It's been absolutely brilliant to speak to you about your time at Teletext and Oracle, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Well,
it's been a real pleasure, and I hope the small part I played in the history of teletext is of interest to people as well.
Thanks again to Gareth for his time to tell us more about his experiences with teletext and his career. You can catch up with more of his work on automotiveblog.co.uk, or you can find him on Twitter at Gareth Herincx. Thanks again for listening. And if you did enjoy the podcast, please do take time to either rate it or subscribe if you're seeing it on YouTube. Giving us a review does do positive things for the old algorithms. And I hope you enjoy listening to the podcast as much as I enjoy making them. If you want to help out in any way at all, please read the programme notes. Teletext People is presented by me, Carl Attrell, and is a bite high no limit production. Until next time, keep it blocky.